Discover prototypical track and turnouts with the Roadmaster series from Oak Hill Model Railroad Track Supply. Proudly made in the United States, Oak Hill's handcrafted turnouts provide unparalleled detail and accuracy, giving your layout museum-quality track work at an affordable price. Whether fully built or in easy-to-assemble kit form, Roadmaster provides all the details of real track. Looking for a custom piece of track work? Oak Hill can help with custom turnouts, diamonds, crossings, and more. Check out all of their offerings on their website, ohrtracksupply.com. It's time for you to submit your answer for the question of the month, our new feature where you get to be heard on Around the Layout. Our question this month: what is the ideal length of an operating session and why? Go to aroundthelayout.com/question to give us your answer. Answers must be received by February 15th. So again, aroundthelayout.com/question.
ATLP Rewind.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining us from Brisbane, Australia, the world-famous Marty Jenkins. Marty, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ray. It's a pleasure to be here and to converse with all the people on Around the Layout podcast.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, and good to see you again. I saw you for the very first time in person at the 2023 National Convention, and we met each other at the the National Train Show.
The National Train Show.
So we saw there, we took a picture to send to Paul just to prove that you and I met each other there, and then got to see you again at Amherst for the 2024 show, and seems like you had quite an adventure, and Amherst isn't just a walk down the street for you. That's a heck of a trip to get over here to the United States, and twice within a several month period. So you've got some miles under your belt there, Marty.
Yes, they're booking a seat, I think, on Qantas and labelling it the Model Railway Row, because it always seems to be model railway hobbyists coming over 2 or 3 times a year. But no, it was great to see you at Amherst. That was an experience. I saw this mystic stuff that I've read about called snow, which coming from a subtropical climate in Queensland is not something that you see here very regularly. You know, I've seen it in pictures and on movies, but actually got to experience it in person at Amherst. So yes.
It's funny you bring that up, because I was standing there talking to Gordy Robinson and a few others, and I said, "Where's Marty?" And they said, "He's outside looking at the snow." And then I jokingly said, "Is anybody showing him how to use a snow shovel and showing him how that works?" But letting him have a try at it. Here's a whole parking lot. Give it a whirl. But yeah, that definitely added to your experience getting to see it snow a little bit at Amherst.
Yes, it was quite different, but Gordy actually, he picked up some of that snow stuff and made it into a ball and then threw it at me and said, apparently they call it snowball fight. So no. I said, I called it assault. But anyway,
yeah, I would call it that too. Yeah, it's but yeah, you got the full experience from snow to a snowball fight and everything else. And then I think you did some traveling after Amherst. Am I right in that?
I went back down to Newark and stayed overnight in Newark for about 3 days, but I got a pleasure to get back out to Dave Abeley's place and have a look at the OC and have an operating session on the OC with Dave, and we surprised him because I actually brought over a V-line B-class loco, and for the people that don't know what a B-class loco is, it's like an F7 with 2 cabs on, one on either end, and along with Rich, one of his operating crew, we managed to smuggle that into his train room and hide it in a corner. And while he was doing his live stream, all of a sudden, round the corner come a Victorian Railways locomotive V-line in tangerine and grey. I know some of the Australians now be cringing hearing that because they're New South Wales modelers. But anyway, each to their own. And then we actually got a chance to get down to Philadelphia and got out to see Ken McCorry's layout, and that really blew me away. Going to see his shed. What between the size of the layout upstairs and the operations and all the rest of it, he's got that cab that's downstairs that's hooked up via TV cameras and all the rest of it to a loco up on the layout, and that was quite an experience spending the morning with Ken down there. And then unfortunately it was time to head home.
But hey, you got a full trip in between the what I would say is one of the best train shows out there, and then being able to see Dave Abeleys and the Ogandata cutoff, and bringing a new name to Foreign Power on his layout, and then obviously Ken's with his that ability to sit inside a cab and run the layout is pretty wild too. So what a great experience. How long is the trip to and from Australia? Because I'm kind of debating this. Paul's like, you got to come at some point. So I'm thinking, like, how long do I actually have to be sedated for that trip?
Well, for me to fly over to Springfield, it's around about 22 hours in transit total. So you do the quick hop straight across to LA, which is only, if you say it quickly, it's not that painful, but it's only about 13 hours, 14 hours. And then, of course, the hop across the country, which is only a short hop of 5 hours or whatever to get to either Boston or Newark, depending on which airport I'm coming into, and off we go, which is why I'm looking forward to Long Beach this year, because all I have to do is get to LA and then I'm there. I don't have another flight after that. It's get the hotel bus and get to the hotel from the airport, which is something that I haven't really been able to do because most of them involve arriving in somewhere like LA and then getting a transfer and having to jump on another plane, which isn't really fun after you just spend 13, 14 hours in a pressurized toothpaste tube getting from Brisbane to LAX. So, yeah.
Well, I just got done from a 5-hour trip each way to and from Dallas, Fort Worth from up here in New England, and thinking about being on a plane for that long just kind of makes me cringe. But maybe someday, like I said, I'll sedate myself somehow and make the trip over to Australia and see your layout, or maybe Paul's, and maybe I'll have to make a very big trip out of it someday with the wife. Maybe when the kids grow up, that'll be a good time to do.
Oh, when you get down here, we'll definitely make sure you've got a tour of layouts and operating sessions to get to. There's quite a bit of a fan base I think you have down here.
Yeah, and Darren's not too far from you. Darren Lee, we just interviewed him. You said he's not all that far from you, right?
No, he's about an hour. He's inland. I'm on the coast. If you walk down the end of my street, you're basically on the Broadwater, which is right on the ocean, basically, which is the unlike a lot of people think, we're not on the South Pacific, we're on the Coral Sea. So down the end of the street's the Coral Sea, but Darren's about an hour or so inland, sort of from me, up over the mountain range and in country Queensland.
Well, that won't be a problem at all. After sitting on a plane for 20 some odd hours, an hour in a car just doesn't seem all that bad. So yeah. that's a trip for another day, down the road somewhere. I'll hopefully get over there and get to see all three and maybe more. But until then, we've got you here, and I'm looking forward to learning a bit more about Marty's train shed and all the adventures that happen inside that building, and some of the things that you get to do from that shed, both internally and externally with hosting NMRA events. But we'll talk about that in a bit. I first want to get to know a little bit more about you and tell me what got you into the model railroad hobby.
Well, I'm probably a bit different to most hobbyists. I didn't get into this hobby till I was probably in my late 40s, mid 40s, late 40s. Up until then, when I was a kid, a teenager, I was a military modeler. I used to do military scale models and dioramas, and I was a member of a club down here. It used to go to a lot of shows with scale models and bits and pieces. But when I was a teenager as well, I also found this other passion, which was playing music. and I learned how to play drums and percussion, and I actually learned how to sight read, so I can actually, I'll walk into a gig, get a bunch of charts, and basically do a night's worth off charts. And down in Melbourne, which is where I grew up, there's a big restaurant sort of evening cabaret type scene. So I played in a number of big bands and the likes through there. Went on to play. I played in basically everything, as I say, from a Highland pipe band through to a blues bikey bar band. So I've kind of played all sorts of bits and pieces. And the beauty about being able to and learning to sight read and being able to play off charts is, someone's rung up and said, listen, they need someone for tonight for this show in this theatre or whatever. Can you go? And as long as you've got about an hour or so to have a look at the charts and see what you got to play, it's sort of yes or no, and you can pick up a lot of work that way. So so I played in a lot of bands up until my sort of mid-40s, when I started to get really tired of being in nightclubs at 3 o'clock in the morning and loading gear out and having drunk slobbering all over you, and decided that maybe this hobby has now turned into a job, which isn't a very pleasant job, and maybe it's time to give it away. I've still got 2 drum kits in the other room that are still set up, and I still got all my cymbal collection and snare drum collection, and I still got 1 kit that I just can't get rid of. That's one I bought when I was a teenager, and my snare drum collection. Yeah, so one day I might even get back into it, but I found this other addiction called model railways, which was what's taken over basically. So as my wife said, you used to go out traveling all over the country dragging a truck full of gear around, and now you go all over the country dragging a truck full of gear around. The only difference is this one's all little trains, and the other one was a drum kit and a PA system and all the rest of the palaver it goes with it. So my introductions, I've always had a fascination with carnivals and fun fairs ever since I was a little kid. Just the fact of how these rides pack up onto one semi-trailer and the logistics of it.
Yeah.
And I always thought it'd be neat to make a scale model of a carnival, an operating carnival. So I went up to a place that used to be open here on the Gold Coast called the Train Place, which was run by a guy by the name of Bob Harris at the time. And it was a huge O-scale display. And he also had N-scale in there and HO scale, but this huge O-scale layout. And I mean, it was probably the room I think it was in was about 40 odd meters by about 20 meters. So you're probably looking at 70 or 80 foot by, probably about 60 foot wide. It was a big room. And Bob introduced me to, he had some scale carnival rides from Fowler that were up there. So I went up there one day to have a little look and maybe pick up one of these carnival rides to start my little project. And I spent the day in the O-scale layout, and by the end of it, I was walking out saying, yep, I think I might make a train on this layout as well and put a train on this layout. And being as I originally came from Melbourne, I thought, well, let's make it an Australian prototype and I'll do Victorian railways. Unbeknowing that, up here amongst Darren and all his New South Wales modelling mates, it's a big opposition, like a rugby match between Victoria and between the 2 states. So that's why we always have a bit of a dig at each other about, well, if you didn't have those orange trains, you'd be right. But
Isn't it funny how these railroads, and even here in the North America, and I hear you were talking about, New South Wales and Victoria, the Victorian Railway, It's almost like it's exactly that. We become like these fans and sometimes rabid fans for a railroad, and it turns into like sports. It's like I'm thinking of rivalries here, Yankees, Red Sox, and baseball in the United States. And then it's like Norfolk Southern versus CSX, or even, if you're a Conrail guy, don't you dare say CSX, because that's, that's taboo. It really is funny how we take in just the fandom of these railroads almost really to that sports level.
It is, and that's that happens here. I mean, as you're pretty attained between different modelers here. What prototype? No, you don't. Oh, you model those trains,
Yeah.
It's a bit like, well, my football team's never won anything except the lottery, so you know. It flies on from there. So I thought, okay, I'll model Victorian railways, and I started collecting, and that started the addiction, as my wife calls it. She said, this isn't a hobby, it's an addiction. You get suckered in by the vortex and off you go, and that's probably my biggest problem, because as you can see by the layout's been in construction for many, many, many years. Because I got the nickname here of Squirrel, because as soon as I see something move, I'm off running down a different rabbit hole, and a few of those rabbit holes have been very interesting, and virtually all of them have provided some addition to what I'm going to put on the layout as it's being built. So
So I find this really fascinating that, it really wasn't railways that brought you into the hobby. It was really the carnival thing. And then the railways was really kind of an afterthought to all of this. Have you kind of balanced back towards it being more model railway centric or is it still really kind of focused on the carnival?
Well, I do have a carnival layout that I've taken to shows in the past, which is currently being rebuilt in the garage. But the layout here is basically based on Melbourne in the early 80s. That's the idea behind it. It's on 3 different levels, and it's not a layout of Melbourne, but a layout of certain Melbourne scenes. So I've got the Kensington Flour Mill, which was one of the big flour mills that used to be very close to the city, which was serviced by the railways. I've got the Nissan or Datsun car factory, which used to make Volvos and Datsuns, and that's shipping that off to an intermodal facility. So I've got like Webb Dock, Dynon Street, engine facility. So I've taken bits of Melbourne, and that's what I plan to put on the layout. So people say, "Oh, you've got it's Melbourne in 1983. Have you got Flinders Street Station?" Well, Flinders Street Station would be like doing a model of Grand Central Station. That's all I'm going to fit in this shed is that station, if that's what I'm going to build. So I've had to just pick suburbs and sites that are outside of the city. But if anybody's from Melbourne, as soon as they walk in, they would recognise certain buildings, certain signs. There's, as you come into Melbourne, you drive in through the freeway, there's a big grain silo with a NMRAx Plastics, which was a company in Australia, neon sign above the top, and it has a clock and a thermometer that alternates underneath it. Well, I've got a model of that. A guy's actually done a 3D printed model, and I've actually set it up where the clock runs, and you can have the clock on real time, or you can have the clock on fast track time out of the JMRI on the layout.
Awesome.
And the temperature can either be the temperature inside the shed or the temperature outside the shed. So
Yeah.
As you could tell, I'm an electronics nut. My background is as electronics engineering. So as soon as I get things like that, it's like the guys in our club say, don't let him near anything with glue or paint. But he's fine with a soldering iron.
Nice. Kind of curious, as going back when you got started here, prior to all this, what did you know of the actual prototype railways? And then, how did that process come of learning it as you were adding railways to this layout?
Well, my knowledge of railways when I started in the hobby when I was about 45 or so was absolutely nothing. I knew nothing of the prototype. I knew what they were because I used to catch them to go to school every day. So I knew the trains that I wanted to get and collect.
Yep.
But as to their operation, as to the layout and the names of the different areas of the Victorian Railways network in Melbourne, I had no idea. So it's all been research from looking online, and this is another rabbit hole that I've gone down is sitting there then doing research, and I found a guy online who's got a bunch of videos on Australian signalling, and I'm just totally immersed in those, especially the ones in Victoria and New South Wales, because they're very similar. But I can adopt that now in my signalling and the likes on this layout, because now I understand how their system works. Yeah, it's been that's one part of the hobby I really like, is the research and the history. Whether it be old narrow gauge lines here. I'm fairly involved with a line called Puffing Billy, which is down in Melbourne. I actually grew up walking distance to Puffin Billy, and I've got one really good friend. He was my best man at my wedding. His house actually is dissected by the Puffing Billy track.
Oh, no
So
kidding.
yeah, there's many a time we've spent on a sunny Sunday afternoon having a barbecue on the veranda, waving to all the Japanese tourists as they go past in Puffing Billy on their way up to Gembrook or Emerald, and then waving to them when they all come home again, and the like. So yes, it's doing the research and learning the stories and learning about the layout the layout of the railway system and how it evolved, how it started. I actually did a talk at Texas on the eclectic nature of Australian railways,
Hmm.
and went through the basis of how we ended up with so many different gauges, and the fact that we were basically a bunch of separate countries here until Federation, when they put everything together as Australia. And you can see that when you look at the railway maps, because all the railway maps go from in the interior to a capital city in that state, or to the coast to be shipped off. There's very little rail lines until sort of the mid 70s that actually run up the coast between the capital cities.
Okay.
And yeah, it's quite different to I think how railways developed in America and how railways have developed in the UK and the likes.
Yeah, well, it's neat, and all of this to say, it's just amazing. One of the things that comes as part of this hobby is the history and falling down those wormholes, like you were saying, or rabbit holes, or whichever hole you want to fall down, right? Whatever animal dug the hole, you're falling down it, and it's just amazing the stuff you learn about this, including me learning tonight just from you about Australian railroads, and kind of all separated, but you dive deep and you just learn all this fascinating stuff.
It was one thing I remember is I read an article, and it was talking about Douglas MacArthur when he when he left the Philippines during the war. He moved to Brisbane, and his headquarters was in Brisbane, and of course he was trying to gather all his forces for the big push later on, and a lot of the stuff had to be shipped from New South Wales and from Melbourne and Victoria, and he was aghast at the fact that between Melbourne and Brisbane, you'd have to the stuff would have to be unloaded and then reloaded on two separate trains to go from 5'3" and 5'3" and a quarter to 4'8" to 3'6" to actually get it to Brisbane. And one of his comments was your rail network designed by the Japanese? Because that's all it's helping at the moment.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Yeah, slowing everything down over gauge and everything else. Yeah,
Yeah,
but it's
because
fascinating.
that was the thing. If you ship stuff up, it got to Albury in Victoria, New South Wales, and they'd have to unload the whole train, all the cars, if it was sheep. The funniest thing was there used to be an overnight sleeper service between Melbourne and Sydney, and it used to pull into Albury at 1 o'clock in the morning. So at 1 o'clock in the morning, everybody would be woken up on the train to get up, get out of bed, walk across the platform, and get on another train and go back in there and go back to sleep. And and then would move on. Eventually they did change it with a bogie exchange program, so they'd lift the cars up and swap the trucks out underneath, and off you go. And that way they could leave everybody sleep in the one train until they get there. But I thought, yes, it's the only overnight sleeper service where you get woken up at 1 o'clock in the morning to change trains.
Yeah, that's great. Imagine, I just can't. Yeah, 1 a.m, you're waking up, dragging yourself. Oh boy, yeah, that's not a whole lot of fun, though. And then you mentioned that, your background as an electronics engineer and, your fascination with that as you're getting started in this. And, I'm not trying to put too much of a calendar on this to show your age, but I would imagine that it was a few years ago when you got started. What were some of the kind of electronics things that started to really appeal to you?
Well, back in those days, I worked a lot in automation. I worked for Honeywell, and I worked for a couple of car manufacturing plants, and I worked in the lift industry for a while. So I'd always been exposed to automation and computer control and the likes. And when I saw trains, oh yeah, we could adapt this to computer control. And this is well before DCC even came about. So I bought a system, would have been in the early 90s. It was secondhand and came through Bob at the train place. He's responsible for a lot of this addiction. Um,
Yeah.
uh, and it was a Solata control system. It come from Italy. And basically what it was like a big train controller with 5 knobs on it. And those knobs were coloured differently. You had a red one, a yellow one, a orange one, a blue one, a green one, and you bought a decoder, what they called a receiver at the time, which is a chip, akin to probably the size of a house brick when you look at decoders today,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you put that in your loco, put it on the track. Now, when you operate it, if you put the yellow decoder in, when you operated the yellow knob, the yellow train moved. And so it was like a color-coded digital system.
Yeah.
Ridiculously expensive. Nothing like DCC is today. So I had that for a little while, and then I saw Bernard Lenz brought out the Set 01. So I ended up buying a Lenz Set 01, and yeah, that was great. That introduced me to DCC, but then I wanted to expand because I thought if we're going to do anything, we're going to need to have this talk into a computer. So the next thing was then looking how a lens system connects to a computer. And in those days, it was $600 for the interface unit. And
Yep.
I thought, no, that's taken the hobby a little bit too expensive at the moment. So I found out that Digitrax had a system where you could get a serial port adapter to LocoNet, and that was only about $100. So I thought, rightio, we might change systems and go with Digitrax. So I sold the lens equipment that I had, and I bought a Digitrax Chief system, I think it was called. I still have the components of it here. It had a UT1 throttle, which only had 2-digit addressing. So there
Yep.
were only 2 numbers that you could dial in for its address, and it had 4 functions, and that was it. That's all
Yeah.
you had on it. And I think it was a 100E power command station that it had. But I could plug that into a computer, so I started playing around, and there were a bunch of programs available and some free software and the likes at the time. So I started playing around with that, and then I think I got exposed to JMRI when it was, I think, about maybe version 4, version 4.42 or something like that. So very early using JMRI, and from there it just snowballed into, right, we're doing occupancy detection, we're doing signal control, we're doing different power management, and I've basically stayed with Digitrax hardware. This layout all here is all the occupancy detection, all the stationary decoders, the command stations, they're all Digitrax. I don't use any DCC, don't use any Digitrax throttles. Everything's all on Wi-Fi, on either proto throttle for the shunting yard or mobile phones for throttles. I've got the Digitrax plugs here, but just never bother using the actual throttles themselves.
I've experimented with both. Obviously, the proto throttle is probably, you talk about an addictive hobby. Just get a proto throttle and start playing with it, and you're addicted. And boy, oh boy, one day I'm going to get myself there to a point where I'll have one. And I have friends that have them. I've went over, the last time was over at Matthew Frick's. I played with the proto throttle there. I kind of cursed that I had it. Had David Hyde down in Texas, got to see his layout, and they put a proto throttle in my hand. I kind of cursed it at that point because, it really is. It's like, I don't know, putting a really good flavored beer in your hand, right?
Yeah.
It's just very addictive. Yeah. But it's neat. It's amazing, the technology, and you seemingly have followed that, the growth of technology in the hobby, and, the ability now where you can just use your phone and run as a throttle, and it definitely helps make it a little bit more accessible. And then, kind of almost your imagination is, the world is your oyster kind of thing, where you can just start, expanding out from there with all this technology.
Yeah, so I've got on the layout here, there's cameras. The idea eventually is this will be set up for remote ops. I had the pleasure of doing a couple of remote op sessions on Dave Abeley's layout, and they really are fun. And all you're basically looking at is a CTC panel of where your train is, and you're driving it off Engine Driver off your mobile phone. So he'll give you the IP address and you can connect in. But when we first did it, I thought, this could be a problem. Let's see what happens with the lag. So he had a camera hidden in his hidden storage where you were going to end up when you'd finished your run. And I was looking at the loco, and I'm sitting there hitting the headlight button here in Australia, and there's about a second delay between when the headlight come on the video to when I was actually hitting it here. And I'm saying, hang on, we got like about a second lag on controlling the headlight on a loco on a layout in New Jersey, and I'm sitting in Brisbane.
Amazing,
how wild is this now? And doing a couple of remote op sessions on his layout, and then the Silicon Valley lines, seeing what those guys are doing as well. The layouts, the opportunities for operation and the likes are just shooting out through the window. You got things like Speed, who's doing different remote op sessions. He usually has like Gordy has dispatched his layout quite a bit. So there's a guy sitting on a rock in the middle of the North Sea dispatching a layout that's in the back of Texas.
Yeah, right.
Who believed 10 years ago that we would be doing this kind of stuff? And I just sit back and think, like, what's the next big thing that's around the corner? Well, I've seen some things which I think are going to be the next big thing.
Yeah, I'm just still wildly impressed. I can have a interview with somebody from Australia and have this kind of clarity and lack of lag time. And now we're to a point, like you said, 1 second delay on remote operations from New Jersey to Australia is just absolutely amazing with the technology. You bring up operations, and you talk about participating on Dave Abeley's layout. What introduced you to operations?
I'd say probably I went to a layout. What year was that? 2015, when the convention, NMRA convention, was in Portland. I ventured over. That was the first NMRA convention I'd been to, and I managed to get a trip out to Charlie Comstoke's layout, the Bear Creek layout, and they were having an op session there, and I got to participate and run a couple of trains, and someone was explaining to me what this operations thing was, and then I came back to Australia and I found a bunch of guys over here that are doing it. So I've been to a couple of op sessions here in Queensland, but most of the ones that I've been to have all been in the States, and usually due to the OPSIG group. I joined up with the OPSIG group, and off we went there. Down in Sydney, they tend to have a lot more, I'd say, operations-based layouts. Up in Queensland, I think it's just starting to take on with people like Darren and there's another guy by the name of Craig Mackey who has the casino layout, which is casino is a town in New South Wales, so it's basically the North Coast line up into Brisbane. And he has op sessions on that I usually attend. So yeah, it's starting to get a bit bigger. Like, I think I'll be the first person in my club that'll have a layout that is actually built for operations. A lot of the people here build layouts to sit and either take to shows, so they're either modular and transportable, and they live in a trailer, or they build layouts to sit back and admire the scenery and watch the trains go by. Operations, for some reason, I think in Queensland is nowhere near as big as it is in New South Wales or Victoria. I've been to a couple down in Victoria. One is AMRA, which is the Australian Model Railway Association. Their club rooms in Melbourne, and that's, of course, all based on Victorian Railways in Melbourne. So they've got an urban station network. Now, how they used to do the signalling there was with bells, and there were different toned bells for different stations. So when an operating session's running in there, what they've done to simulate the bells is they've taken some toy pianos apart and put different keys in different stations. So when you walk into the club rooms down there and they're doing an operation session using the bell system, it sounds like a bunch of mad school kids have got hold of a bunch of toy pianos and are just banging the hell out of them, and there's no tune or rhyme or reason, but they're all coded signals to the next station on the line. So yeah, it's quite different. An op session here can be anything from like that to a US-based type op session with radios and the likes.
Being out of tune must be a little difficult for a musician like you to hear.
Oh yeah. When I'd imagine someone like David Hyde would cringe when he walks in there because as I said, it just sounds like a bunch of mad people hitting the toy piano. But anyway,
that's an interesting way to operate. But yeah, that's really neat. And I'll tell you, if Darren Lee has his way and the way he's bringing people in and training them, that definitely helps build up operators. How did you start to meet folks in that area that were model railroading? You talk about trips to the U.S. and the folks you met there, but how about within your area? How did that network get built?
Well, I started off again. I got into this hobby, and I'm not one to just dab your feet in there. I thought if you're going to be in it, you might as well jump in and get submerged straight away. So I got involved in my local club down here, and then I found out about the NMRA. So I joined the NMRA in Australia, and started to help them organise a few bits and pieces. Our club put on was put on a train show each year for probably about the last 11 years or so. So got involved in that, in the trials and tribulations of organising a model train show and the likes. And next minute I found myself, I was the Div Super. Unfortunately, the Div Super we had in the NMRA, Glenn Stevens, who basically started this division up, and this is the largest division in Australia. and unfortunately came home from an operating session at his club and collapsed in the driveway and passed away.
Oh, that's
So
terrible.
I suddenly found out that I was now the div super because I was the next in line.
Oh boy,
So I
yeah.
was 9 years as div super up here for the NMRA. Did a few things like getting the proposal together. We actually put a proposal in for the 2022. 2018 convention, 2020 convention, which didn't happen due to COVID, but to have it in Australia. So I put a proposal together for the US board on having the convention in Australia. I think the length of airline flight time was a big downer in that one, especially as you said, people coming from your side of the states. You've got 5 hours before you even reach LA, and you're actually leaving the country. So it does make it a long trip. Um, and yes, and from there, I then found out about. I went over to a convention in America, and then I found out about the American NMRA, and started to meet a few people through there. And I guess it was then my involvement in different podcasts, and with the NMRAx, the start of that I started to get known amongst people overseas, and that still blows me away. It was the biggest thing every time the 2 times I've been to Springfield is the number of people will come up and say hello, and they know me, and I turn around and I go, I don't have a clue who you are. And I have not. I mean, it even happened when I was at Springfield. I thought, oh, what was it on the Sunday? I thought, oh, I was told that this one hamburger shop was really good, so I thought I'd go and get a burger from there and go and there's some seats over there. It's nice and quiet. I'll have a sit there and just watch people walking by and have a bit of a relax. And I'm sitting there, and this guy walked past and he said, "Oh, is anyone else sitting on here?" And I said, "No, you can sit down." He goes, "You're Marty. I know you." And I'm like, "Who are you?" I haven't got a clue who you are.
Yep.
I'm Bob from
Yep.
Oklahoma or wherever.
Yeah, it's amazing that world of quasi celebrity and
Yep,
meeting folks. But what an awesome opportunity it is when you get the chance to meet all these folks. Although
it
I'm sure
is.
you kind of were like I was a little talked out by the end of Amherst.
Yep,
I was straining a bit.
yes. It's. I mean, the first day I got there, there was a bunch of guys from Queensland who'd come over to Amherst with us last year, and I said to them, "Oh, like you go down over that side of the Better Living Centre, and you'll see blah blah what you're looking for, and I'll be down there in a minute." Well, about an hour later, they come walking back up the highway, the walkway, and I've only got about 10 feet away from the NMRA booth, and I'm still talking to someone else, and
Right.
they just looked at me, shook their head, and turned around and walked away. I think I saw them Sunday afternoon then.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely challenging when you get to, but what a great thing to be able to know so many people and have so many people know you, and be able to have those conversations with people from around the world. It's just really fascinating.
Yep, they call me the koala guy over there as well, as you no doubt know. Yeah, I usually come over with. I think I came to Springfield with about 70 koalas, and yeah,
Nice.
they all got populated around the place. So
I
yeah,
still have mine. I named it Paul in honor of Paul Cassar. So yep, mine's still hanging here, and it'll go back on mine for the next time around. So yep, I still have my koala that you gave me, and kind of curious about this club. You've mentioned it a few times. Why don't you tell us about this local club that you became involved in?
okay. Well, on the Gold Coast here, we had a group of us that used to like a round robin sort of thing, meet in different people's houses every couple of weeks or so and do work on their layout and the like. So that started to get bigger and bigger, and we got up to about 15 people. So we decided that okay, it was time. Let's make it a formal club and see if we can get some rooms somewhere for the guys to to build a layout, because there were quite a few members in our club that, they don't have a layout, they don't have room to build a layout. So the club is the place where they can go and run their models and see if things are working, what they've built, if it's working or the like. So after many years, we finally got an area up in a place called Heritage Park here on the Gold Coast, which, as it says, is not just Model Railway Club, but there's also the Preservation Society. So there's a guy next door to us who's got a steam-powered sawmill. We've got all the steam tractors up there, all the historic society kind of things are there. So we fit in quite well, because the club is very much, we've got a number of prototype layouts on the Gold Coast. The Gold Coast used to have a railway that came in here that was ripped out in the 60s. And now, due to great government decisions, we're now building a new railway through the Gold Coast after they already had one here and they ripped it out and sold all the land, and now they decided they've got to buy land again and build a new railway line. So we have a layout of Southport, which is one of the main towns here, with the actual station in there of how it used to be, and we get quite a bit of interest in taking that around to different events, such historic events and things, for like we just did one a couple of weeks back with the Southport layout at a Gold Coast council meeting, basically of history of the area. So there's probably about 20 of us in the club, but our main thing is you've got to enjoy going to shows and you've got to enjoy putting on shows. We've got layouts that are in the club room, but they are all modular, so they can all be taken apart and taken to a show. We don't have a fixed, large club layout in there. But we have been given another plot of land there, and we're looking to build our own shed up there at the moment. The club rooms are now all air conditioned and aligned, and
Wow.
that was a big project this year for the small room that they've got there. But eventually we'll have our own building up there, and and we've got everything from N scale, HO. Queensland, which is 12 mil, not 16 mil track, and then standard HO, and then we've got a large ON30 layout that's based on Puffing Billy on Emerald Station and Puffing Billy. So all the layouts that we've got there are actually based on something. So you can actually say it's either something in Melbourne or something on the Gold Coast or Brisbane.
I was going to ask that. You mentioned all these wacky gauges that the prototype has. Is that all able to be modeled pretty easily from supply, or do you kind of have to modify stuff to get to these different gauges that are all around?
No, they're pretty lucky now, because you've got manufacturer. When I first got into this hobby, if you wanted to model Australian, the only thing you could do was, as Darren, I think, said on his podcast, is you had to buy kits and you had to build them. So you had to learn some skills on actually building a model and painting it and weathering it and detailing it and the likes. Now we've got about 4 or 5 really high quality Australian ready to run manufacturers. Probably the most common is a company called Decision, and they make some really beautiful stuff. I mean, I think they use the same, it's the same quality if you look at it as Scale Trains or any of the high-end manufacturers in the US, but it's all on an Australian prototype.
Nice.
So getting the stuff is not too hard now. Now, because we have the different gauges, well, Melbourne and Sydney, whether you got the broad gauge, the 5'3" or the 4'8", there's not that much of a difference between them. So they all tend to use standard 16 mil HO track. You do have some people that use HO, I think it's HO metric, which is 1 meter, which has got, I think, 18 mil between the rails.
Okay.
But most New South Wales and Victorian modelers will use standard HO track 16 mil. When you get to Queensland, the Queensland manufacturer is actually, I think it's HOE, which is the 12 mil track. So
Hmm.
it goes down to 12 mil, which is a common one out of Europe. So in the days gone by, people modelling Queensland would buy European mechanisms or European logos just to rob the mechanisms out of them so
Hmm.
that they could fit them into a Queensland prototype model and then run it on 12 mil track. Um, You've got people like Craig, who has the casino layout that I mentioned before. Well, because that's a 4'8" line coming into Brisbane, it merges with the 3'6", and he actually has dual gauge track on his layout, so you can run both the 12 mil and the 16 mil at the same time. Mine won't be. It's all Melbourne, so it's all HO standard 16 millimeter between the rails, and it makes life a lot easier. But you can get the prototype track, and as I said, Queensland Model is one of the biggest ones. Is a company called Whiskey Models, and they make all their models in either 12 mil or 16 mil gauge. So you can buy their models to run on standard HO track, or you can buy them to run on the actual prototype 12 mil track.
Oh, wow. Neat. That's very cool. They're covering, and I'm sure there's rivet counters around the world that want that accuracy, and
Oh,
it seemingly is available to them right there in Australia.
yes. It's just as bad over here as it is in the States. All of a sudden, a manufacturer will release a logo, and someone will come on going, that handle wasn't there. That handle was 3 inches to the right or whatever, the flame wars that start on the internet.
Oh, yes. Yep. Well, it goes with every hobby and pretty much everything. There's always somebody that's going to be able to pick out that detail. But great that you have that quality available for Australian models. To have it something compared to scale train certainly says something about the products that are available to you over there, and that's phenomenal. One of the things that Paul mentioned to me was that you are the Blue Nami expert of Australia. And maybe that's a big title to put on your
Yeah.
shoulders there, but I know you've been working a lot with Blue Nami. Why don't you tell us, for somebody that may not have heard or doesn't quite understand what Blue Nami is, why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, it's another rabbit hole which I've jumped down. It's the latest rabbit hole. I was in when we were in Texas. Well, actually, before we got to Texas, I was speaking to Michelle Kempermar on line, and she said, "Oh, I've got to go when Texas is over. I've got to leave, and I've got to drive all the way back to Denver for the narrow gauge convention, which was on the following week from Texas." So she said, "Do you guys want to do a road trip?" And I said, "Oh, what would that involve?" And she said, "Oh, well, we could go to Durango and ride the Durango Silverton, and then we could go to Chalmer and do the Cumbrous and Toltec, and maybe something else on the way up, and then get up to Denver, and then go to the narrow gauge convention." Well, being as I'm semi narrow minded, as in I have ON30 stuff here with Puffing Billy and the like, so I kind of know a few people in the narrow gauge scene. So I thought, oh, okay, well, let's take an extra week off, and we'll stay here and go with Michelle and do the trip and go and ride these trains, which have been a bucket list item to go and run.
Yeah.
So we get up there, and she said, "Oh, Nancy Workman's going to meet us from Soundtracks in Durango, because that's where obviously their factory is and everything."
Right.
So Nancy met us, and she took us on the Durango Silverton. We went up for a drive, and then we came back, and I met George Bogatuk. We went ran to his layout, and we'd been talking about these balloon armies, and like they know I've got a lot of ESU product, and I've been a ESU user for a while. And they said to us, "Oh, have a look at this, the Bluetooth and the balloon army." So, yeah, okay. I thought, it's just another way of controlling a train or controlling a loco. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm at the narrow gauge convention. I'll buy a couple of these Blue Namis and then take them home, and I can put one in a loco and have a play around with it and see what all the hype is about and what we're doing here. So I did that and brought it back. Well, I think about a week after being back and getting it in a loco, that was it. I was ordering more off them. And as I said to George, this is the biggest thing to hit DCC since sound started.
Wow, that's all. That's quite a bit of. That's a statement there.
It is, because this just opens up a whole raft of options for people, especially if you're new. We got 2 new guys that came up and were interested in joining our club, and I was running one of the Puffing Billy locos, which has a Balloon Army fitted. And they were looking at the iPad and seeing the app and how it works. And they said, oh, what do we need to do this? Do we have to have a computer running? Or I said, see this little 12-volt wall wart power pack? That's all you need. I said, you build your layout, you wire 12 volts to all your track, you buy a Balloon Army chip, you have got a full DCC system, and you haven't had to buy a DCC system.
Wow.
So all you do is buy the decoders. You've got the app. The app's free to download. You can get it for Android. You can get it for Apple. Off you go. All you buy is the decoders. Don't worry about DCC. Don't worry about, just buy a good power supply, a good switch mode power supply to give you a nice, clean 12-volt supply. You wire that to your layout like you used to wire your old DC layouts. Off you go.
Wow.
Then I had another guy at approach me, and he has a DCC layout, but he goes and operates on his mate's layout, and he's all DC. So they've never been able to interchange equipment between the two.
Yep.
So he bought a Balloon Army decoder. Now he's got a full DCC loco running on his mate's DC layout. All his friend has to do is turn the throttle up on the channel, and he's got full digital control.
Wow.
I've had another couple of guys look at it and go, oh, this is great for just programming and setting up your locos, because as we all know with JMRI, if you put a sound decoder loco into JMRI and you tell it to read all the CVs, you can go and have a 3-week vacation, come back, and it'll probably still be reading all the CVs just through the way that it works. It's got a polar motor. It's got to actually drive a little bit, send some data back, put that into its table, and off you go. With the Balloon Army, you tell it to read all the CVs, and it'll read every CV in around about 4 seconds, 4.5 seconds. When you're doing programming, such as setting your volumes for all your decoders, if you're doing it in JMRI, you'd go into that page and you'd grab the slider and you'd make an adjustment, and then you'd have to write that information to the decoder, and then you'd have to go and trial it. Well, as your loco's running around, you can grab the volume sliders or any other function and change it, and the change is immediate. So you can take the volume down to 0 and it's gone down to 0. You can turn it back up and it goes straight back up. There's no writing to the decoder or anything like that. So I've seen a bunch of guys look at it and buy them, because they say for the price difference, it makes setting up decoders, instead of that being a half-hour, 40-minute project, it's now a 3-minute project. Because once they got the decoder set up, you read that decoder back into JMRI and you've got all the settings stored in there. So, it's got its advantages. It's not something I would say to people, look, get rid of all your other decoders and replace them with these. It's just going forward now, you can add some additional stuff to it. We had one guy who's got a DC layout and he won a loco in a competition. And that loco's got like all the marker lights, ditch lights, all the bells and whistles on it. But because he's got a DC layout, he can't run any of those. So he said, I wouldn't mind if that had like the functionality, but I don't want to have to buy a DCC system and change my layout and all the. So he just bought a Balloon Army decoder. now he's got all the bells and whistles that Loco came with. Didn't have to buy a DCC system, and it cost him about $40 more than buying a good quality sound decoder. So
yeah, and I see that's probably the place for it in the market, right? Is our good strong spot for it in the market is those that have DC layouts moving over to DCC in a cost-effective way. Yeah.
Yeah, and new people coming into the hobby.
Yeah.
And instead of having to go out and know, do I need to buy Digitrax or NCE or this brand, and then learning how to operate the throttle, you just get the decoder and a 12-volt power pack, and off you go. It's only when you want to do occupancy detection and all that kind of stuff that you might then want to do something different, and then of course there's different ways to do that. But that's another rabbit hole to go running.
Oh yes, it sure is. But just amazing the technology, and it seems like it leans towards the things that you really enjoy with electronics, and as it just continues to evolve. The neat stuff. I'm just thinking like Iowa scaled with all the stuff they're doing, obviously the proto throttle and then the squealer. And I just know that they're going to be the next folks that come out with something like I know Boulder Creek was making a defect detector, and they're unable to at this time, but I'm sure ISE is going to be the next one, and they're going to come out some wild stuff we haven't even thought of yet. So it really is amazing, the stuff. And
I can see the future where you'll buy a sound decoder to go in your Loco, and it'll have Bluetooth. Now, whether you want to use it or you don't, because like the Blue Nami is basically just a Tsunami 2, so you've got all the features you'd have in a Tsunami 2, except you got Bluetooth accessibility as well. And I reckon eventually you'll find that they won't make a Tsunami 2. There'll just be a sound decoder. If you want to use the Bluetooth, it's there. If you don't want to use it, you use it like a normal decoder, like with your DCC addressing. And that's how it works at the moment. So it still conforms to all the standards with the NMRA because it works like a normal decoder. But if you want to use the Bluetooth ability, well, then it's got that ability as well.
Right. Yeah. Just absolutely amazing. It's really neat to have those options. And I think you're right. It's going to become standard equipment, and then, and then who knows what's next?
Exactly.
It's amazing.
We're doing wireless communication now to the Loco. So the next thing is information coming back, so things like, the back EMF. We can do things like where the app can control the MUing of the Locos, because the Locos talk back to the app, and the app says, hey, the middle one's pushing or pulling, and it can do its speed table matching all on the fly in real time, like the real trains do.
It's gonna be wild to see that for sure. And I'm sure you'll help cover it. And one of the things that I know you're involved in is, the education portion and your involvement in NMRAx. And that's probably why a lot of people recognize you, Marty, when they get to see you sitting at that desk and, during the NMRAx virtual conventions. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how you got involved with the NMRAx?
Okay, well, NMRAx basically started off. I met Gordy at Kansas City, at the convention in Kansas City. It was the first time I'd met him. And we sat down and we were having a chat about, online at those days you had the Google Hangout groups, which was, a predecessor of all these StreamYards and all these applications that are out now that allow us to talk to each other.
Right.
I was involved with a bunch of guys called at those times they were called YouTube model builders. And they did everything from model railway through to scale models through to everything. And they ended up changing their names to Model Railroading Live. But I was involved with those guys, and I said to Gordy, we were at a clinic. He was actually doing a clinic on online environment and bringing your division online. And I said, I'm going to live stream this from the convention. So I started up my laptop at the time and had a USB microphone and camera, and I just turned that around and pointed it at Gordy, and bang, we it went out, and about 6 people watched it.
Yep.
So I said to him, we were talking at the convention, saying, "Listen, maybe we could do something online. The NMRA needs to get more online." And back in those days, I mean, that we were printing application and voting forms out, and everything was still very much the old way.
Yep.
And we said, "Hey, we're gonna do this." So we both went home after the convention and chatted online about it. And then all of a sudden, the dreaded 2020 pandemic hit, and everybody couldn't go anywhere or do anything. So we said, "Listen, how about we start this off?" And Gordy said, "Yeah, let's do a 24-hour one as the very first one." And I thought, well, first of all, we don't know if any of this is going to work. Secondly, you're going to book up 24 hours of presenters and people. We might only get 10 minutes in and everything's going to fry, because I'll give you some indication of the hardware that we did the very first one on. It was an old Dell Optiplex ex-government PC that didn't have any graphics cards or anything in it at all. So it struggled doing video or anything like that. Coming into a pretty poor internet connection I had at this house at the time. It was still ADSL, and then streaming out to the world. So we started, and the very first presenter we had was Ralph Renzetti, and I was doing the presentation for the first one. So we started off, except I didn't look at my watch, and instead of starting on top of the hour, we started 15 minutes to the hour. And someone told me, "Oh, people are starting to come on," and they're saying, "I thought this started at 12 o'clock or whatever." So I had to stop Ralph in mid-flight and get him to rewind his PowerPoint presentation to the beginning again, and we started the whole thing again. So it's always been a joke that Ralph's done that clinic 2.5 times on NMRAx because he got halfway through it the first time, then we had to send him back. But it worked. We actually did 24 hours, and back in those days, now we're using a bit better technology, but basically all we used was OBS, and that was it to output the stream, which is a pretty basic program to put together. But it was all run through this Dell computer here. So when I went to bed and Gordy took over, he had to use TeamViewer to dial into my computer to control the show from Orkney on. I mean, now we've got it set up a completely different, which, we've got like with StreamYard, you can do it from anywhere in the world. But back on that very first one, we didn't know what we were doing. So it was this poor little Dell computer here had to have TeamViewer connected from Orkney, plus it was trying to pump out video that was coming into it from all around the world to the internet. So I'm totally amazed that we got through that very first show without anything falling over. Since then, Brad, who's got fiber optic to his house, and I mean, we've updated our PCs. We've got, as you know, a proper streaming PC now, so we can we can do it. But yeah, those first days, it was like building a boat with a blunt Swiss Army knife. I mean,
that's how some of these start, and it's amazing. And then you were doing all that on an ADSL connection, which is just blows my mind. You were able to stay connected, but you advanced it, and it was a great start because having these things accessible to people that either can't travel, or at that point, I mean, nobody could travel anyway. And we talk about how awful the pandemic was, but a lot of positives spun out of it, and then NMRAx is one of them. And it was kind of necessity. We want to connect. This is what we have to do, and now it's kind of lived on as an ability to reach. And then we've got regional conventions like the NERX that runs that does a very similar thing. So it was a great thing to get started and helps everybody. And it's so digestible because you might not be able to make it every night, but you can go back and watch the replay. And if it's something that's not really in your wheelhouse, fast forward to the next one or do whatever you want. But yeah, it makes it very digestible for people.
Exactly, and the thing is all of those videos are available on the NMRA YouTube channel, and I'm working through there at the moment to resort them under the presenters' names, because unfortunately we had a presenter who did some brilliant work on buildings and structures and city scenes, and that was Jim Sacco, and his clinics are up there for eternity now for everybody to go and see. And Jim was he had city classics. He was a really good city structure builder.
Yeah, so it not only becomes a clinic, it becomes kind of a journal too. It's
exactly.
It's a record of that person and their talents and abilities being shared, like you said, in perpetuity. It's amazing. So yeah, that's awesome. And a great thing that you've done there. And boy, you just got a lot of stuff going on in that train shed, don't you, Marty?
Mate, there's that. We haven't even dabbled a bit. The biggest rabbit hole I went down was 187th remote control vehicles. And
wow.
I could go. That was a 2-year rabbit hole, but I've got some interesting vehicles here. I've got a little Mercedes G-Wagon, which is actually true 4-wheel drive. It's got 2 operating differentials in it. It has full independent suspension, and it has roller bearings on each wheel. So each wheel actually has its own roller bearings. I met up with these couple of guys from China who are watchmakers, and they do all the mechanics and bits and pieces for them. But they taught me a lot of neat tricks on how to build, just converting standard models into 187th operating vehicles, which is, as I said, that was another 2-year rabbit hole of running down and understanding how these remote control systems work. And because it's all different to when I was a kid and played with remote control cars or planes. Now they have a digital system like we have DCC. So it was learning all the protocols and how their systems work and then applying it to these models. But that was a very enjoyable rabbit hole to go down.
Well, I imagine, and it sounds like you're just, your love for electronics and now tied in between, the railways and with the cars and then all the technology that's coming along with the hobby. It seems like you're here to stay in the hobby. That's for sure.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Like I said before, my wife calls it an addiction, not a hobby, because Martyn will find something else that's shiny and then he'll be off running down that rabbit hole.
Well, it's a good addiction that keeps you out of the bars at 3 a.m. and gets you back home early. And she knows where you are. You're out in Marty's train shed.
Yep,
so.
I'm at the shed in the backyard, and it's all air conditioned out here and insulated, so I can survive the Queensland heat, of which we're slowly dissipating. It's quite a nice sunny day outside, probably low 80s, low humidity, so it's quite nice after. That stinking heat. That's what made me laugh when we were in Texas. I'd walk outside with Gordy and he'd just about melt in 2 seconds.
That was me too. Me too for sure. But you can keep that high heat over there, and that's great. Marty, we've run out of time here. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll have to get you back on the show. We'll talk more about the Melbourne 83 and get to know more about your layout and so much more. And I'm sure by then something else will be invented that you've fallen down a rabbit hole about and you'll be able to tell us about. But until then, Marty, thanks for taking the time to join us here on Around the Layout.
Not a problem, Ray. It was a pleasure and a great joy.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.